Hey everybody, it's Joel Williams and Chase Elleby from Williams Elleby coming to you today with another question for that we have actually taken a step back and kind of trying to uncomplicate things a little bit between me and you and everybody out there that might be watching this video. I don't know if it's 10 or 10,000 people, but anyway, what we did is we went to Google, we typed in different questions and let it autofill common questions that people have that we might be jumping straight past. So what we want to do is take that step back. And today we want to answer the question, who is liable for my injury?
Yeah, the person who caused it. End of video, right? It seems simple, and most of the time it is simple, like a car wreck, for instance, right? If somebody rear ends you, it's clear that they're the person at fault, right? They're the person that's going to be responsible for the injury. But oftentimes it can be multiple parties, whether it's a person or a company or a person working for a company. It could be a child driving a parent's vehicle, so you could have some fault on behalf of the parents and also the children. So it's usually pretty clear as to who is liable for the injury, but there are some nuances to it, right? So then the follow-up question that we usually get is, okay, well, who's responsible for the injuries? Is, okay, well, who pays for it, right? 99.99% of the time, it's going to be the insurance company, right? Joel and I could sit here and tell you stories about how many times people call our office and say they have a case, but they don't want to sue the person. We don't file lawsuits, and that's literally every single one of our clients. And I always reassure them, like, we're not suing necessarily that person, even though we have to, but it's always the insurance company that's going to be paying for any judgment or any settlement based on the injuries. Okay, it's never the actual person. I've never collected a single dollar from a person. We've never garnished wages, taken a house, or anything like that.
Yeah, it would definitely be the very rare case where something like that didn't happen. But I think it's important to distinguish between fault and liability, because although those two terms are very closely related, they are different, right? So, for example, Chase mentioned an employee and an employer, or a child and a parent. So even though the child may be at fault for causing the wreck, or the employee may be at fault for causing the wreck, it may be that the employer or the parents are liable for it, meaning that liability flows up to the parents or the employer, meaning also that the parents or the employer's insurance company is going to be paying for the employer or the parent's liability. So there's two different things to consider. There's fault and liability. And so one reason it's important to distinguish between those two terms is fault. You may have a situation where our client bears some fault, or the person bringing the claim bears some fault. And at least in the state of Georgia, if that person is 50% or more at fault, then the other person that they're suing or bringing a claim against is not liable for anything.
Right.
But if the person who's bringing the claim, the claimant or the plaintiff, is less than 50% at fault, then their ultimate recovery is reduced by that percentage. So imagine a situation where someone has $10,000 in damages, but they're 20% at fault, and then the other person is 80% at fault. Well, they'll recover $8,000 because the defendant is only liable for the 80% that they are at fault for. Right. So fault and liability are very closely related terms, but there are differences, right? Another situation in the state of Georgia anyway, we have to deal with what we call a non-party apportionment or non-party fault. So there may be a situation where you have the injured person, you have the person they're bringing a claim against, but the person they're bringing a claim against says, well, even if we are at fault to some extent, Johnny over here is also responsible, but you didn't sue him, so that's non-party fault. Well, Johnny, if you don't bring a claim against him or sue him, is not liable for anything, even though he may bear fault, right? So fault, liability are different things, but liability, when I think of that term, I usually think of who is the person or entity or corporation responsible for paying for the damage that was caused.
Right. Right, and that's a good way to boil it down to. And a lot of the times it's the same, sometimes it's different. So another issue when we're talking about who's liable for my injuries is just, let's say you're hit by a county vehicle, or you fall on a city sidewalk, or in Georgia, for instance, Georgia Highway Patrol causes a wreck. Well, in that situation, you're dealing with immunity, right? So you're dealing with immunity from the state, the county, the city, and in Georgia specifically, unless there is insurance for the most part to cover those types of claims, then there is no recovery, right? It may be at fault, but there's nothing you can do about it because immunity is going to protect them from paying anything. So it's another issue to consider.
Yeah, and there are other situations where fault and liability are kind of reversed, because generally, in order to be liable, you have to have fault, right? You're not, in 99% of situations, you're not liable. You don't have to pay for something unless you bear some degree of fault. There are exceptions. The biggest one in the state of Georgia that comes to mind is in products liability cases. We have certain claims are strict liability claims. There's public policy reasons for all that, but unless you have a claim that falls within one of those narrow exceptions, you're always going to have fault before you have liability to some extent. So to short circuit the answer to this question, I know I said we were going to try to keep it simple, and here I go right off into the briar patch, right? But just remember, the person that's liable is the person who is responsible for paying for the damages that's caused. Even though it's their insurance company is acting on their behalf, but whoever ultimately would have to pay is the person that's liable for the injury.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah.
All right. I hope so, because we're putting it on YouTube. All right. Well, if it does make sense, or if it's been helpful to you, we would appreciate you giving us a thumbs up or putting a comment in the section below. Otherwise, we will see you next week.